I'm the co-author of The Last Beach Boy. And I want to tell you just a little bit about our relationship, if you will, before I introduce Bobby. We first spoke on the phone more than a year ago, it's been. And Bobby had been trying to find someone to write his biography, and someone gave him my name. So we connected, and as we talked, he was telling me a little bit about his life, and I was telling him a little bit about my experience writing biographies for people. And I could tell just from that conversation he had a real story to tell. And I assumed that maybe he wasn't sure I was the person to tell it. So a little bit later we got together, made an appointment, we met face to face at the Metro Diner in Ponte Vedra Beach. And over coffee, he started spinning these wild tales of his boyhood adventures growing up in Jacksonville Beach. And I'm thinking, wow, what a life this man has lived. And I was hooked. And my only regret was I didn't have a recorder at the time to capture some of these stories he'd been telling me. Well, we talked for so long, the wait staff at the Metro Diner was sweeping around us, putting chairs on top of tables, and giving us some dirty looks. So we retreated to the outdoor patio and continued our talk. Of course, by our talk, I mean, he talked and I mostly listened. But he did ask me a few questions about my background, and I told him about some of the books I'd written and some of the people I'd worked with and my process of how I went about interviewing people, etc. Well, we parted that day, and he said he was going to think about it. And Bobby did think about it, and before long, it was really by the end of 2021, we came to an agreement. And we agreed we would work together on this book. Before that crystal ball even fell at Times Square, my inbox was filled with many, many emails from Mr. Solano. And all of these emails contain the stories that you're going to read about in The Last Beach Boy. So we worked together for about a year. And Bob would be sending me his stories and giving me ideas, and I was taking these and I was writing and rewriting and crafting it all into what is really a colorful tapestry of the life of the Last Beach Boy. I would have to say he had an amazing life. He hunted and fished to put food on the table as a young boy and a man.
That's not true.
And of course he did. He graduated from Fletcher High, where he was captain of the basketball team that won state championship in 1954. And then he went on to incredible success as a businessman by outworking everybody else around him. Now, before I turn it over to our guest of honor, I want to tell you one thing. I've had the privilege of working with many successful men and women to write their life stories, but I've never met anyone quite like Mr. Solano. So I want you to give a warm welcome to our guest of honor, Robert Bobby Solano.
Thank you, Victor.
You're welcome.
Where's your surfboard?
Well, first, this is the picture that's on the front of that book. That's why I wore it. Now, everybody in here doesn't really care one way or another, or it's funny, except one person may be a little upset, and that's my sister. She wanted me to wear a shirt and tie and either a blazer or a suit. And I couldn't picture myself standing up here with a shirt and tie or a tuxedo or something talking about the Beach Boys. And here's the last thing. She wanted me to be sure I wore a pair of shoes. Now, my Michael Jordan heirs, she doesn't consider those shoes. And being a basketball player as well as being on the beach, I had to wear them. Of course, it's a natural situation. So sis, you'll have to just live with it for a while. But thank you so very much for coming. I appreciate it. I hope that you get a little humor out of this, and I hope you read the book. If you don't, I still like you. Now, I'd like to introduce to you my sister and her husband, Mike. Please stand up. Joyce and Mike live in Ponte Vedra, which I know a lot of you know. She's been in the Ponte Vedra club since the beginning of time. And she's tried so long to get me out of the woods. But I want her to know I'm a little bit out of the woods now. But you know that age-old story? You can take the man out of the woods, but you can't get the woods out of the man. So she's stuck with me the way I am. My son Brian, and his girlfriend Brenda. Now my daughter was supposed to be here. She worked with John and helping him, Vic, getting this thing set up. But as usual, she's a little bit late, bless her heart. She has her own real estate business. She stays real busy, and she's been really happy about trying to work with me in this book. This story of this book is the reason I really signed with Vic was because I didn't particularly want an autobiography of Bob Solano. I didn't want it just to be a plain talking about whatever I did and the people I saw and whatever. I wanted to be a little bit of history in the book about everything. And it starts out, of course, the Solano name is very popular in St. Augustine, and now it's pretty much all over the country. They travel out of St. Augustine in California. They're real heavy. Sacramento is in Solano County. They've got an Indian chief out there named Solano, Chief Solano, and they got a copper 12-foot statue of him, and he was helping the people when they first came out there. For some reason, they ended up naming that. And then there's a Solano mission in the wine areas of California. So there's a lot of Solanos out there. Cuba, Puerto Rico, all of them have a lot of the Solanos. So there's a little bit of story in the beginning of the book about the Solano name. And St. Augustine, of course, being the oldest city in the United States. And the really story is, when I was growing up, I was born in 1935. Of course, that was a lot before all of y'all's time, I understand that. But anyway, we were fishing. My family was fishing on the beach with the seine, cast net. It was my pop's family mainly. And they taught me how to carry the tub and pick up the fish and put them in the number 3 wash tub in the back of the A model. And it was very, to me, that might have been kind of sounding bad to people today, but gosh, I was happy about it. It was just fun as the world. It also taught me how to drive that A model in first gear along the beach, real slow, to keep up with the fishermen as they're fishing down a slough. And so it was really a great time for me. And then my family hunted a lot, hogs, deer, and stuff. And my uncle had a wood yard that my father and my pop cut wood for. And in those days, all they had was the pot melted stoves and the fireplaces. and the iron stoves to cook on. And so the wood yard was a pretty good business for my uncle. So my father had a job for a while, but they worked at odd jobs. Now, one of the biggest jobs they had was moonshine. During the Prohibition, my great-grandfather was the real moonshiner, and my father and his son and them would help my grandfather, great-grandfather. They'd have to keep moving those stills around because the revenues were getting. So that was interesting. Part of that's in there. And there's a story in there about my pop and my grandfather on a trip to North Carolina selling moonshine. They had to meet the trucks from Chicago and New York, the mafia mainly, to get that moonshine. But I'm not going to tell you the rest of it, but it's a very interesting part of it. So those are some of the funny, good stuff that you will find in that book. And then the rest of it is my history with growing up with my pop. My dad died when I was 5. And growing up with him, we fished, and we turtle egg hunted, and we gopher hunted. I don't know if y'all are familiar with gopher hunting, but the Spanish brought that over with them. And in this country, the gophers were very easy a food supply. And they could catch them out of their hole or whatever. That's a hard shell highland gopher, what they call a highland turtle. Now my grandfather told me, he said, Bubba, the turtle was made by God, but the gopher was made by the devil. And I said, well, how do you know that? He said, well, the devil made it, and it didn't look as good as the turtle, so he said that would go for one. So anyway, he had a fantastic sense of humor. He wasn't a highly educated. Both of my father and him both went to school in the 6th and 7th grade, went to work. But they had a lot of common sense. They had survival sense. Survival was the main thing during, the Great Depression and then the World War II. And so it's quite a story, quite interesting. I guess we go from there to the beach where we would be turtle egg hunting or either fishing. And we were on the beach the night the Nazis came ashore at Michael's Pier. We were coming down the beach, and all of a sudden, the Coast Guard was blocked off. We pulled up there, and they said, you can't go any further, you're going to have to go back. We said, what's going on? They said, well, we can't tell you that. We said, well, look, we got to go back 20 miles to get back onto the hard road, and we're going to Jack's Beach. So he called his captain. The captain gave him an okay if he would ride in the beach buggy with us over the sand dunes to get back to A1A there at Michael's Pier. So the story there was, it's when the Nazis, a submarine let off, I think it was 3 of them here, or might have been 4, and they came ashore there at Michael's Pier and buried their arms and the floating ship that they came in on. And so the next day, my grandfather called Mr. Roy Landrum. I don't know if y'all remember that name. Well, that was my grandfather's cousin or something. And he told him, I don't know about it yet, but I'll find out, I'll let you know. So then he did, and the next day or two, he called him and told him about the Nazis. And they traced them down in Jacksonville, and then traced them all the way up north, and some came in from Connecticut. But one of the guys was an American, knew English and everything else, and was raised in America, but he came in with the Nazis. And he squealed, and they caught them all. And I think that they executed 4 of them. But that story is in there, in the book, of the beach Jacksonville Times printing that story. And also, when a submarine torpedoed a tanker off of the pier at Jacksonville Beach. And it burnt for a day or two, and we were on the beach watching it. That's in the book. Not a whole lot about it, but it's to hit the tops of it and the stories of it. So it's interesting. So for then, the rest of it is some history about the beach. And I'll tell you there's one thing. One night me and Pop was headed down the beach, and all of a sudden, I'm about 10 years old. There's a big black bulk thing in front of us, and it's moving. And I said, Papa, it's a sea monster. And I dove into the floorboards of that A-model. So he whipped up into the sand dunes higher up, and he's sitting there, you know. And I'm saying, Papa, let's get out of here, let's get out of here. And then in a few minutes, he started laughing. And he said, come on, get up here, son. And it was a big tanker that had broken loose. When they were pulling in oil tankers, they pulled them off the coast here, and it had broken loose, and it floated ashore. And it was waving like that because the wind flew. So we got to St. Augustine, he called the Coast Guard and the police, and we went down there. They took them 2 or 3 days to get it off the beach. But that's the kind of stuff that's in there. There's some more stuff along those lines. And then we had the great basketball team that we did. Great bunch of guys, a great senior class. I guess we all think that our senior class is the best. But we did. We had a great bunch. We got a lot of Winnie roasts, and we would usually every Friday night after a game, football or basketball, we went to Surfside Casino at Solano Beach. There was a big casino there. Now there's a park, and you'll see the plaque. That's the story that's right in front of that parking lot. It's a county parking lot now. And we would go there and dance, you know, and drink a few beers. A few things we shouldn't do, but thank heaven there was no drugs. I don't even remember marijuana, so it was really a clean situation. We were very blessed. And I would take the guys down the beach as many as I could. The rest of them would drive down A1A in their cars, and we would meet. Until a couple of guys started picking up my buddy Lewis Weber, which I worked at his dad's service station every afternoon from the time I was a sophomore to a senior, and on the weekends. And he was one of my best friends, and he got a Jeep with big tires on it, and he could ride with me. So we shared that stuff. There's also some stories in there, you know, about snakes, running into snakes into the woods, big rattlers. I'm going to tell you one story, and then we'll move on. He and my grandfather were gopher hunting. And I'm about 12 years old, I guess, and I'm pulling the gopher bag, had 3 or 4 gophers in it. And you go from one hole to another, and you know, you have a long pole. It's usually a cypress pole. They'll bend, and on the end, you'd put a bolted metal on it with a hook. And you run that down the hole, and you keep feeling around till you feel the gopher. And strangely enough, they would mainly always be head down, and when you pull that hook up, it would hook them right in the back of their shell, and you pull the gopher. So we had 3 or 4 of them in the buggy, and or in my croaker sack. We get to this one big hole, and he says, well, let's get this one before we get back to camp. So he's running the pole down the hole, and the pole gets all the way down, and it's all the way down. He has to get down on his knees. Then he's laying down, and he's got one hand on the end of the pole in the hole. And he says, yeah, I feel it a little bit now. And I'm standing over here to the side. Now, one thing he taught me when I was growing up, if he said, stop, be still, when we're hunting for deer or squirrel or whatever, I better stop. and be still. Don't be asking me, what's up, what's going on? Just keep your mouth shut and hush. So anyway, he's down there doing this thing with me, Craig on like over, and all of a sudden he said, Bubba, shut up. So I said, I'm standing there and I said, what in the world is he doing? Well, about that time, coming over his right arm is one of the biggest rattlesnakes I've ever seen in my life. His head on him was about that big. He comes right over his arm, goes right down beside his body. And of course, nobody's moving. He ain't moving, and I ain't moving. He moves right on down to the end of his feet. And he just looks around a little bit, had those forks done, spitting, and then he moved on out in the bush. So we're sitting there a few minutes, and he said, I said, you okay, Bob? He said, yeah, I'm okay, okay. I said, well, we're going to go try to catch that guy and kill him. He said, no, he had his chance at me, and he let me go. And I said, well, how about going down that hole, see if we can get it? He said, his wife and kids may be coming. And he said, besides that, I need to get back to the camp, get a drink of liquor, and check my pants. That's one of the stories in there. Well, then after we won the championship at Fletcher, I went for work for a company called Save Stop. It was just starting. I spent about 11 or 12 years with them. Very blessed to have a great president that taught me a lot, sent me to school, Dale Carnegie. And one time I was in Pensacola, calling on the headquarters of Pakistan. Mr. Hornstra, I remember it like it was yesterday. I pulled up to the office, and they had one of their stores, which was called Pakistan, right next door. And there was people lined up in the parking lots, and they were coming out, mostly a lot of youngsters. I said, what in the world is going on? So I got out and went inside that store. They had an icy machine. And the people, the machine couldn't hardly even keep up. And that's the way it was when one of them went in a new store anywhere, that really was a hot item in those days. So I picked up the phone, I called my buddy who owned about 20 convenience stores, and I said, WC, he was in Crestview. You need to come over here and see this. And he said, Bob, if you said I need to see it, I'll be over there within about an hour. He did. We looked at it, he said, man, I need those in my store. So we called up the headquarters of National IC, made an appointment, we went there, want to try to cut this short. And they couldn't give us an IC franchise in Florida because 7-Eleven had it all sewed up. And they had about 400 or 500 stores in those days. So they had the IC business sewed up in Florida, everything east of Tallahassee. So we failed on him getting getting the ICs in his stores, but the president of National IC made me an offer. He needed an operations manager. And he was opening up the West Coast, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Fort Worth, Texas, Salt Lake City, places like that. And he made me an offer for a year. I'd only have to be there a year, and he would give me and WC the first choice of a franchise for IC. So I took the chance, and we did. Went to opened up Fort Worth, Texas first. Then I opened up Las Vegas, and then a couple of other places. I ended up in Salt Lake City. And when I got to Salt Lake City, there was a great general manager there at the 7-Elevens, and they were all ready to, they wanted the ice machines, everybody had been talking about them, and he wanted them in their stores, so they were very happy to see us. So I met with him, we went out to the stores, got them lined up for all of the electricity and stuff, And while I'm out there, I said, do you think they'll go over big here? He said, come over here, let me show you something. He said, look at the candy in here. They had twice as much candy in that $7-Eleven store I'd ever seen. And he said, come back over here, I'll show you something. We go over to the cooler box. Piles and piles of fruit drinks, all colors, grapes, oranges, everything. And Coke and Pepsi was in a little spot. And he said, now, do you know why that is? I said, no. He said, well, this is a predominant Mormon religion in this area. They don't believe in caffeine. So they won't let their kids drink a lot of Cokes and stuff. And he said, the Catholic religion is the next largest. And he said, we got between 5 and 6 children per family out here. So I said, wow. I thought I'd fall into heaven. On the way back, I'm calling my partner, and I'm telling him. He said, well, where is it? I said, it's Salt Lake City, Utah. He said, damn, Bobby, that's the other side of the world. He said, but I'll meet you whenever you think we're going to meet with National Icy. I said, yep. So we bought that franchise. And I'll tell you, it holds the record today for 960 some odd drinks per day. Wow. That's something like 40 or 50 cases a day of regular cold drinks. We had to put 2 machines in every store almost just to have them keep up. So it was a great opportunity. And then to make long story short, here in Florida, you had Little Champ, Jacksonville. You had Jiffy Food, Huntley Jiffy Foods, Shop and Go stores, you name it, Gate, all of them, and this is back, a few years, 30 or 40 years ago. And they didn't have the icing machines because 7-Eleven had them. So we walked into an open market. They were sure glad to see us with cooling machine. And the cooling machine was a Taylor ice cream machine, and they had put a carbonator in it, so it was developed into a frozen drink. It wasn't quite as good as an icy, but it was damn sure good enough that people loved the hell out of them. And so we were fortunate, and when I sold that company in 1981, we had 2,500 convenience stores that we were servicing. Now you're talking about service problem. That's a machine that's trying to turn a product into frozen 2 degrees less, and you got liquid, wouldn't be any good, 2 degrees higher, and it freezes up the chamber. So it was a challenge in the store to keep it running, but we did it. And then we went into Maxwell House Coffee during the fall of the year, and it was super. That's pretty much it. There's some other stuff that we went on after I sold that business, but it's immaterial. But I want to really thank you guys so much for coming out and listening tonight. But there's one little poem that I would like to read to you before I do. Hand me, what you do with my book? Yeah. I've known this poem for years, but I didn't memorize it. But it's in the back of the book. When you guys leave here, may the road meet you all the way. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm on your face. May the rain fall softly upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Thank you so very much.
you can see why I signed up with this. Does he have some great stories?
Yes.
Well, the next step is we're gonna go out there and Bobby is gonna sign his book. So we have plenty of them out there. So grab one and we'll be happy to see you. Thanks again.